I know we just put out a prop, top 5, Jameson Williams, 50-1 on DraftKings. Oh, that would be sick. We hit that one. We're waking up in a new Bugatti.
Hello, and welcome to episode 362 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always, joined by Evan Silva, and it is officially NFL draft season. I know this because round 1 is just 2 weeks away. We've already taken like 18 draft props. Things are getting a bit out of hand there. Evan has his first mock-up. But anyways, my point is that it is time to start examining these prospects. For that, we are joined by an old friend of the show. He's dedicated his life to examining the hip swivel and the jaw lines of 21-year-old football players. It is, of course, Mike Renner of Pro Football Focus. Mike, how's it going?
It's going great. And when you put it like that, it makes me sound even creepier than I actually am. So that's a great way to put it. But it is like when you dig down deep into it, like my life, the fact that it revolves around like evaluating young men is an interesting career decision.
What a life. Trust me, me and Evan's life is not that much better, believe me. Evan, good afternoon. How's it going?
It's going well. I want to shout out Renner for giving us Josh Palmer last year as a nice little sleeper. Might be the eventual replacement for Keenan Allen. Had some DFS relevant weeks right off the bat, and potentially his role could grow here shortly. But yeah, Renner's one of the best in the business, and this wide receiver class is highly intriguing. Mm-hmm. I know we just put out a prop, top 5, Jameson Williams, 50-1 on DraftKings. Oh, that would be sick. We hit that one. We're waking up in a new Bugatti.
Oh, God. Yes, we did just take that. We'll talk about Jameson Williams more in a little bit here. On today's show, we're going to talk about the incoming class of wide receivers and the incoming class of tight ends. From a macro stats, my feeling is that wideouts are coming into the league more and more ready to play these days for a lot of reasons that I think are kind of obvious. Like college programs are obviously run more like NFL teams now, advancements in training at a younger age. But like some of these recent rookie years, I mean, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson in 2020, Jalen Waddle this past year, A.J. Brown in 2019, like you can really hit the ground running now at wide receiver, whereas in the past, it's been more of an uphill battle, I think. Before we get into it, wanted to remind everyone this show is brought to you by Establish the Run USFL. USFL kicks off Saturday night. No better way to spend your Easter than with Spring League, Minor League Football. Our product is live right now. It's $119 for the whole season. We have projections. We have ownership for every player on every slate. Top Plays live show, continuously updating depth charts, Cody Main's best bets, showdown coverage, lots more. Go to the subscribe tab on the site for more details. All right. I think, Mike, the consensus around this wide receiver class is that it's very good and very deep. The current line on the number of wide receivers to go in round 1 is 5.5, and the over is -180. I mean, that's a ton. I mean, the market is expecting at least 6 wide receivers to go in the first round. Mike, what's your thoughts on this wide receiver class as a whole?
Yeah, I do think it's deep. Now, the top end talent, I think the 3 guys that went at the top of last year's draft, so that's Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and Devontae Smith, would have all been wide receiver 1 in this class. I don't think there's any guy at the top that's quite touching those guys. But in the mix, like I said, the prop is over 5.5. I feel very strongly that that's going to hit because it is a deep class. And I think you're seeing, like you mentioned, wide receivers hit the ground running earlier. A lot of rookie seasons that have been successful in recent years. And just the sort of arms race around the NFL, everyone's seeing what the Bengals did. Everyone's seeing what the Bucks did and how they had so many wide receivers. And that's how you win games in the playoffs. That's how you survive against the elite defenses in the NFL, is to have options. So I do think the coveting of the wide receiver position, you're going to see it more and more in this year's draft. You'll probably see a lot of these guys go early.
There's certainly a quarterback shortage in the NFL, Evan. I'm not sure there's as much of a wide receiver shortage, but it seems like more and more teams are willing to take wide receiver early. What do you think about the trend of NFL and wide receivers in this class as a whole, Evan?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a clear emphasis and the coaching community in the NFL is getting younger. And I think that among the younger coaches, and Greg Cosell has talked about this on his podcast, which is called Tape Heads, great show, people should listen if you're really into the draft. That the young coaches nowadays are emphasizing explosive plays, which primarily come in the passing game. For a long time, the old school coaches, they wanted to possess the ball. They wanted to get to third and manageable. And now the younger offensive coaches are realizing that, there's just so many advantages to the passing game and to creating explosive plays, which come via the passing game, that's what they're emphasizing. And we see that borne out in the draft. Jalen Waddle went earlier than people expected. You remember, it really started with that John Ross went earlier than expected. Henry Ruggs, I think, went earlier than people expected. And teams are emphasizing this. And I think these wide receivers are going to go quick, especially these, the big play receivers, Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, and I think that they're going to go early in this draft.
I think Mike's point is an important one. There's no Jamar Chase in this draft. There's no Amari Cooper. There's no Julio Jones, like outrageous wide receiver prospects. But I think the point that there's not even a prospect as good as Jalen Waddle or a prospect as good as Devontae Smith says something. Now, that doesn't mean that one of these guys isn't going to hit and be better than one of those guys. But just from a prospect evaluation standpoint, I think what Mike said is worth noting here. There's no one truly, truly elite, but a lot of good options. I want to talk about some of them here, and I'm going to go in order of odds to be the first wide receiver off the board. I don't think that's a very efficient market. I think, Evan, we took Jameson Williams to be the first wide receiver off the board, or at least top 10. And then we got the 50-1 in the top 5. Also have Jameson Williams under 16.5. We're going to get them in a second. The two guys that are more likely, according to the market right now, to go ahead of Jameson Williams are Garrett Wilson and Drake London. Garrett Wilson, of course, 6 feet, 192, 4.38 at the combine. Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you, Mike. I mentioned 4.3 at the combine. What was going on at the combine? Everybody was running these outrageously fast times. And like, it used to be nobody would run 4.4 and below. And then all of a sudden, everybody's running 4.4 and below. Do you think there was something amiss with the track, or do you think these guys are actually faster than in years past?
I do. I think there was something missed with the track. This was like one of the first years where you saw a lot of slower pro day times than you did actual combine times. So guys like David Bell, the Purdue wide receiver, he goes 4.65 at the combine, then 4.74 at his pro day. Like Kyle Hamilton went 4.59 at the combine, then high 4.6s at his pro day. So there was something amiss. There was a new timer this year. It was I heard it wasn't Charlie Casserly, so there was a new guy making the start. So I think it was truly like bad times this year, like inflated times this year that you often see at pro days were the ones getting reported at the combine.
Right. Yeah, it was Mark Ross doing it, the former Giants executive, and I think they changed the track though too.
Yeah,
that had to have played a big role because historically the Lucas Oil Stadium field turf was like considered slow, and then and as you mentioned, Mike, the players would then go to the pro days and run faster, but a lot of the times were slower at the pro days. That really stood out.
I mean, how is this not timed like an Olympic race? Like, is the NFL so cheap that they can't get the USFL technology for the first down marker, and they can't time the 40 like they time the Olympics? There's no debate at the Olympics of what a guy's time. It's not Charlie Casserly standing there with a friggin' stopwatch. But anyways, my point is that maybe 4.38, maybe we shouldn't overreact to Garrett Wilson 4.38 like we would have in the past maybe, but still a really good time. Obviously, what do you think about Garrett Wilson, Mike? And do you think that 4.38 is legit?
Yeah, I think all those times got I'd say about a half or 0.05 added to them is what I would add about 0.05 to each one to sort of have a yearly adjustment, because I mean, the NFL themselves tweeted out it was the fastest group of every position group ever, except for quarterbacks. Quarterback was the only group that wasn't the fastest group in the history of the combine. So something was amiss. Garrett Wilson, though, speed was never a concern. Like, I never thought he was a blazer, straight line blazer, but he has more than enough speed. It was more the size thing. So you said 192 at the combine. He actually weighed in at 183. And at 6 foot, like I know last year we had this entire debate and it was beaten into the ground with Devontae Smith, but there are things that skinnier wide receivers will struggle with more at the NFL level than they do at the collegiate level. And one of them is press coverage and the physicality. Every single cornerback he faces next year is going to be bigger than him, like the NFL corners are 190 plus at a minimum. There's not a lot of guys doing it in the 180. So as soon as he gets to the NFL, that's kind of the biggest worry with me. And I got a lot of flack for this on Twitter, saying he might have a Devontae Adams-esque career. But I think the point of that was that Davante Adams sucked out the game. His first couple of years were not good for the Green Bay Packers until year 3, year 4, where it really started to turn on for him, until he really started to get a hold of how to get off the line of scrimmage, how to sell his routes efficiently. Because to me, Garrett Wilson has that level of shake, hip swivel, whatever you want to call it, that either you have or you don't. Right? Like some of the routes he runs are just other guys in this class physically cannot do and aren't going to be able to do. And so you buy into that talent level, but he is the lone sort of exception of usually Ohio State receivers come into the NFL polished products. I think he's still a little rough around the edges as a wide receiver prospect.
Yeah, Adam and I are of course, old enough to remember the Davante Adams, Jeff Janis debates.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that was a real thing in Green Bay. But it's because he sucked. Like he legitimately was not good. Like had some issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the market has propped up Garrett Wilson to a point where it shouldn't be. Like, I don't think it's clear cut that Garrett Wilson is the best wide receiver in this class. Evan, I'm curious what you think about that and any other takes on Garrett Wilson.
I just think the most common comparison that he has generated is to Stephon Diggs. He won inside and out at Ohio State. I just think he's a high floor receiver, despite the size concerns. With the 4.38, like his other athletic measurables were not that impressive. Like 36-inch vertical, it is fine, but it's not great. 10'3" broad jump. You would kind of expect a guy that runs 4.38 to be more explosive with his jumps. But I mean, I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be a really, really good player, and he's going to be a day one starter. So I'm not worried about him.
Oh, I know. I'm interrupting the video. Wah. But if you're enjoying this video and want to see more fantasy football and DFS content like it, please just take 2 seconds, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button. Really does go a long way for us, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and now back to the show. Let's go to Drake London. These big slot guys, and I don't know if that's what he's going to play in the NFL, but like I'm always intrigued in fantasy by these guys who are big and play in the slot. Drake London, 6'5", 210. Lance Zierlein said he runs and moves like an athletic tight end, which obviously doesn't sound too great. What do you think about Drake London, where he'll play in the NFL, and his outlook, Mike?
To me, he's a really high floor player. So only 20 years old still. Doesn't turn 21 until the summer. Has only really had one off season because he played basketball. Started his career at USC. He was on the basketball team there, and then they had the COVID off season where he didn't get to obviously have that spring ball, and then only started focusing just on football this past year, and then obviously explodes into the most productive receiver in college football, like on a per game basis. So broken ankle. That's obviously going to be an issue, but should be back healthy from that. It's not really a long-term injury, but his speed's the issue. And like I said, probably a big slot because he's a 4.6 guy, and he just is not going to stack and run away from NFL caliber corners. But Cooper Kupp doesn't stack and run away from NFL corners either. So it's going to matter a lot to him. So I see him if he goes to a role where like Michael Thomas plays in New Orleans, like Cooper Kupp plays with the Rams, where it's a lot of intermediate, a lot of underneath stuff where he can use his shake, use his separation ability at that level, use that physicality and the ball skills, he's going to produce. Like to me, he's a pure possession type of wide receiver that if he's in that role in an offense, 100 catches, easy because of his ball skills, because of his physicality. But if he gets pigeonholed to the wrong scheme, it could look ugly there for a while because he's not, if you're looking at him and value him as a pure X vertical threat wide receiver, he's not going to be good at that. He is not going to gain separation at that level. So for where he ends up, like I said, it's going to matter a lot.
I think in the NFL, formerly, Evan, slot guys were pigeonholed as like they have to be 5'10" and 180 pounds. That kind of changed with Marcus Colston, which was a long time ago. Now there's a lot of big slots in the NFL. What do you think of Drake London?
Yeah, Allen Robinson is a player that has really excelled in the slot. One of the few good things that Matt Nagy did in Chicago was, get Allen Robinson in mismatch situations and line him up in the slot. He was deadly in the slot when he's been healthy over the past few seasons. I think that Drake London could be like that. Allen Robinson also was another 4.6 guy. If you remember, he did not run fast before the draft. I think you're just like estimating his speed, right? Because I don't think he's actually run, right?
Yes. He has not run, correct.
Yeah, and that's fine. But I agree with you. I saw some people comparing him to like Mike Evans. I don't know. I don't know if he's like that.
No, Evans was bigger, faster, and way stiffer. So Evans is not like an after the catch guy at all. It's a pure vertical. To me, London's more get it and then make something out of it, because he broke a ton of tackles at USC. Is really, elusive after the catch to where that's going to be his role. I don't see the Evans. He's not going to be an Evans type of guy.
Let's go to Jameson Williams. This is the guy who, if he goes in the top 5, you may never hear from Evan again because he will be retired on the 50-1 shot. But anyways, Jameson Williams, Chris Mortensen reported, I believe it was today, he expects Jameson Williams to go in the top 10. We took Jameson Williams under 16.5 draft position, as I said. 6'2", 189, started at Ohio State, transferred to Alabama last season, lit it up, 79 catches, 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns. Of course, tears his ACL in the national championship game. That was tough to see for such a great prospect. Are there medical red flags around him, Mike? I assume that there are. Do you think that will prevent him from going in the top 5 or top 10? And what's your outlook on Jameson?
Yeah, so we're 4 months out now from an ACL. Like he should have, they should know, I guess, at this point, how the surgery went, how his recovery's going, to project enough to where if a team feels comfortable, if we haven't heard anything, basically is what I'm saying, then he's good. Then he should be healthy. He should profile to coming back somewhere in the middle of next year, if not earlier. To me, without that injury, he is clear-cut the wide receiver 1 in this class. He has the most sort of irreplaceable skill set of any of the top guys. Because, I think from a draft perspective, Drake London has talked about his contested catch ability. You can find someone like that, like a George Pickens in the second round, Garrett Wilson, all-around route runner. Maybe you find that like a Skyy Moore in the second round. There's no Jameson Williams. There's no guy who runs a 4.3 that, averaged over 20 yards a catch in the SEC that you can find in the second round. He has a elite skill set for that. To me, he's kind of in this pantheon of Bama speedsters. He's below Jalen Waddle, but he's above Henry Ruggs. I think he's a better prospect than Ruggs was coming out, a much better route runner, and has like enough of that shake to where he's not just a straight line guy. He can make one guy miss and then take it to the house, to where you're going to see teams look at that and just think, I can't pass on this if that's what I want in my offense. And we've talked about the explosive plays. How everyone wants that. He's better at generating explosive plays than anyone else in this class. So he is going to go high. That under 60.5 draft prop is, you might as well cash it now if we get a clean bill of health here.
Oh baby.
I mean, I think the indications are that he's gotten a clean bill of health, because we've got more, out here saying that he's going in the top 10. Eric Galco, who's pretty plugged in, he has said that he thinks that Jameson Williams could go in the top 10. This dude had 94 career college catches. He scored 18 touchdowns on 94 catches. He had 2 kick return touchdowns in his final season. We talk about that as something that, is an underrated like characteristic when players are transitioning from college to the pros. Like, these guys are good with the ball in their hands. Like Des Bryant was an awesome return man at Oklahoma State. T.Y. Hilton. I mean, these Odell Beckham. These big time wide receivers in the NFL are great with the ball in their hands. And this looks to be, Jameson Williams is just nasty. I mean, he's got his highlight reel is awesome. He went 7 for 184 and 2 touchdowns against Georgia's defense, which is like, one of the best defenses in the history of college football. I think he's gotten that clean bill of health. I wanted to ask you one thing though, Mike, and there's a narrative that because Jameson Williams started at Ohio State, and this is a narrative that he transferred because he couldn't play above Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. And there's another guy with the guy with the hyphen at Ohio State. Yeah. That he couldn't get on the field there. So that's like a red flag. I mean, but the people that push that narrative, I guess you're just totally dismissing how dominant he was in the SEC this past season. I mean, does that carry any weight with you?
It doesn't, truthfully, because you just think about, one, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, they're going in the first round. So once that job is kind of won, and it got won basically 2 years ago, back in 2019, when Wilson played ahead of Jameson and Olave was already kind of the breakout star there. That's as a true freshman. Are you going to bench a first round talent? Are you going to say, hey, Garrett Wilson, I know you're great, but we're going to give your snaps to Jameson because the speedster behind you is like all of a sudden better. It's like, no, you're really not. It's like that's just not something that happens. especially when the guy's playing as well as Olave and Garrett Wilson did. So to me, he could have been truthfully better going into, the back half of 2020, and they just weren't willing to make that move because he's not a slot guy, which is where Jackson Smith and Jigba plays. He is an outside speedster, which is where Chris Olave kind of his role, which was already so established into where it's why he transferred and why, he makes hits at Alabama the way he does. But to me, that narrative holds zero weight whatsoever.
Yeah, it would kind of be like saying, well, Russell Wilson, he couldn't even play above Mike Glennon.
Yes, exactly.
So he had to transfer, to NC State. It was the coach that made the mistake. I think his name was Tom O'Brien. The coach screwed up, So I don't buy into that stuff either. But people love to bring that stuff up.
We also literally saw it at Ohio State with Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow. They chose Haskins.
Great point.
Joe Burrow goes, and which one ended up better in the NFL?
Let's go to Treylon Burks. So I was just looking around a few days ago for information on Treylon Burks, and I come across this story that this dude, for fun, hunts wild boar, not with a gun, with a knife and his dogs. And then it goes on to say that these wild boars are 200 pounds. So he's going out there with a knife and his dogs, with his bare hands, essentially killing 200-pound wild boars. I thought that was cool. It makes me think that he's, a tough guy narrative, whatever. 6'3", 225, great size, but only 4.55, and 4.55 on that really fast track. So really, probably if you normalize it, closer to 4.6, maybe 4.6 plus. But he had an immediate impact in the SEC as a freshman at Arkansas. Obviously played really well for them. What do you think about Treylon Burks, Mike?
Yeah, so he went 4.55, and then he stood on that time at his pro day. He didn't even attempt, which means in training, that was a good time for him. He knew that was as good as he was going to do. So to me, he's very similar prospect-wise to like a Laviska Shenault, where everyone knew he was kind of the best athlete on the field in terms of just with the football in his hands, being able to make plays, being able to create after the catch. You mentioned like the hogs. He's probably been eluding 200-pound hogs since he was a kid. Like that's eluding an NFL safety or a collegiate safety. So he can do that. He's elusive. He has that ability to him, but there's really no polish as a route runner in that role like that, even Laviska played at Colorado. You're getting pumped screens, you're getting pumped these underneath stuff that's really not even, translatable. You're not going to get those targets at the NFL. So a lot of his production, you can just wipe off the map because you're not going to do once you get to the league. He's not going to be your gadget guy in the offense. So then what is he? He's a kind of a project wide receiver who then tests like an average athlete and I get that he's big and has good size, but you're kind of just relying on ball skills and maybe him developing at that size when the athletic traits don't necessarily suggest high developmental potential. So I'm a little lower on him. I think where Laviska Shenault came off the board in the early second round is probably where I'd value someone like Treylon Burks and just hope that they end up figuring out the wide receiver position. But I think he's going to have a fairly steep learning curve once he hits the NFL.
Also, on a different team, Laviska Shenault, I feel like could be productive, right? Like, I'm not ready to give up on Laviska because he failed. He failed with the Jaguars and Urban Meyer or whatever else. Evan,
yeah, but that's still a pretty cringy comparison. I mean, we've lost a decent amount of money here on Laviska Shenault.
Yeah,
but with Treylon Burks, it's these athletic measurables are not very good. I mean, and it's not just the 40 time. It's his vertical was 33 and a half inches, and he's got a 7.3 3-cone time. I mean, that is not very good. Now, Kevin Cole of PFF has shown via his analytical analysis that athletic measurables for wide receivers are not nearly as important as production. Mm-hmm. But as Mike mentioned, a lot of this production was manufactured for Treylon Burks, right? So I don't know. He's a tough guy to evaluate, I think.
Let's go to
I'll just add to that. Like people have made, AJ Brown comps, DK, because he's of similar size, but you look at those guys just body compositions versus Treylon Burks. Like Treylon Burks is a meaty 225 versus the shredded 225 of AJ Brown and DK Metcalf. Like he's carrying some bad weight too to get to 225. So he's really not that big. Doesn't have that level of size.
Well, that makes me think of like Alshon Jeffrey.
Yes,
I mean,
more than that.
You think he could be like that? I mean, Alshon Jeffrey though was like
time.
a big time like ball winner though too.
Yeah. That is where Burks, like, he does have ball skills. He does have a big wingspan. I think he actually has a bigger wingspan than Drake London, despite having like ceding 2 inches to him. So he is that physical presence at the receiver position, but that's really the only way he has one yet.
Let's go to Chris Olave, 6'1", 188, ran 4.39 at the combine. Rest of his testing wasn't that great. I think the rap on Chris Olave is just like pure route runner, one of the best in this class. What do you think about that, Mike, and anything else on Olave?
Yeah, to me, he's very much like Calvin Ridley coming out. Like, you're not going to throw him screens. You're not going to expect much after the catch. You're not going to expect him to win contested catches. He's not, he doesn't profile to that number one kind of wide receiver. But as a complementary piece in a high volume passing offense, he can get open. He gets open, is a NFL ready route runner, NFL ready speed, that intermediate downfield. If you, like I said, you get him in the right offense, he is going to produce, and probably produce early on in his career. I think he's more NFL ready of him versus Garrett Wilson. It's just, he's limited. I think he's broken 9 tackles on 176 catches his entire career. Just not that dynamic of a guy, but the route running, ball skills, speed, all there to where he's safe to a degree, but just not going to get you too excited.
Anything on him, Evan, or we should run through some of these backer day 2 guys a little bit?
Well, I think he's a player that you can poke some holes in, but I think at the end of the day, like, he's going to be, a quality NFL starter. But he's, you're not going to play him inside. He's going to be a pure outside receiver. I had him number 17 overall to the Chargers to play on the perimeter and be a little bit more of a field stretcher opposite Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. But I think he's going to be a good player. I don't know. He's going to have to land in the right situation for to be like a fantasy factor, though. I think he might end up being a little bit more of a role player.
All right, let's run through these last 3 here. These are kind of back end of the first round, maybe. I think definitely day 2, though, at the absolute worst, but definitely could go in the first round. I'll start with Jahan Dotson, shout out Penn State. I mean, he was awesome for Penn State last year, 91 catches with, I want on average quarterback play at best. I think the question around Jahan Dotson is always going to be, is he physical enough? And like, you could say the same thing about KJ Hamler, and I actually liked KJ Hamler coming out as a Penn State guy. Obviously had the injury and we haven't gotten to see it yet, but what do you think about Dotson? I know a lot of people are mocking Dotson to the Chiefs these days, Renner.
Yeah, I doubt he goes in the first round, truthfully, just because, he's 178 pounds, 5'11", 178, not a massive wingspan. Now, he has great ball skills, as good as it gets in this class in terms of like plucking it out of the air, going up and getting it out of off-platform stuff. But I just really, really worry. I said I worry about Garrett Wilson against physical stuff. I really worry about him, Jahan Dotson, against physical corners in the NFL. To me, I think he's going to be a slot only. And that's already, once you're taking stuff off of a guy's plate that he can do, you're kind of limiting his value and limiting his situations he can go to and succeed. So that's the kind of the knock about Dotson is you already saw physical play get at the better of him at the collegiate level. So and as a senior coming out, older prospect, I do worry that that's ever going to change. So I really like him in the slot. I think he's super reliable. But again, slot production is almost all where you end up. Do you end up in, Josh McDaniels coach offense, Patriots offense, where you could flourish? I mean, he goes there and he could put up numbers. But if you go to a run of the mill, most offenses around the NFL, they kind of treat the slot or where he'd play as an afterthought.
Yeah. Evan, it doesn't sound like Mike thinks that Jahan Dotson's in play for back of first round. What do you think about Jahan Dotson?
I mean, I think that he could still go first round. I mean, there's a ton of teams at the end of the first round that need wide receivers. So, and I think that he could. I mean, the Chiefs, the Packers, like, I think he still could go first round. But I want to hear Mike talk about George Pickens, because George Pickens, if you listen to the Move the Sticks podcast, Daniel Jeremiah said he was talking to somebody at Georgia, and they said that George Pickens is better than AJ Green. And I had to rewind it to make sure that I heard that correctly. But George Pickens, I don't really know what to think about George Pickens, because he only played in 12 games over the last 2 seasons. He's been hurt. He tore his ACL in March of 2021. He just hasn't been out there very much. But is there enough tape to even break him down, Mike?
I think so. And this is so why I say I don't think Jahan Dotson's going in the first round, because I think George Pickens is going to end up going in the first round.
Hey, love it. We'll take that because we just put that prop out. So
because his size, as much as, you know, you can look good on a collegiate field without, you know, being 6'3", it helps a lot on an NFL field. And the windows get tighter to have guys who can really go out, you know, outside of their frame and pull it in matters a lot. And Pickens, I mean, he had 2 drops his entire college career. He has insanely good hands, probably the best hands in this draft class. There's some catches that he makes on tape that are out of this world. And the other thing that's going to NFL evaluators love, and especially, you know, the fits with like the Packers and the Chiefs, this dude blocks his ass off. So he is going to fall, like the teams that covet that, you know, that's the Shanahan tree is all about wide receivers that'll block. They will love to watch George Pickens tape because he is a guy, probably one of the best run blockers at the wide receiver position in this class. So great ball skills, great run blocker. Just, again, like you said, haven't seen a lot of tape. Tore the ACL, came back, was not quite healthy, and Georgia knew it, only played him a handful of snaps in the games he did come back this past year. But has that true outside wide receiver skill set that, man, if he played this year, because like going back to his freshman year, he had the best freshman tape of anyone in this class. If you just project that out, what that could have been, what that could have looked like this past season, I mean, he could have been a top 5-10 pick. Like that's how talented what he showed early on in his career was. It's just we didn't get to see it. So that's why I think he still ends up in the first round.
Yeah. I love that guy goes to Georgia. He's 6'3", 200. He plays wide receiver. Oh, of course, he's the next AJ Green. Just no brainer, no problem. Okay, the last guy I wanted to ask you about specifically, I feel like this is like the trendiest guy, right? Like if you're like a cool, like, I don't know, like you wear plaid and like you skateboard and everything, you're into Skyy Moore, right?
What?
Like because
that's is that still cool? That was cool. Like
I don't think that's cool
1988.
anymore.
Skateboarding is back, bro. But anyways, it's trendy to like Skyy Moore, and I get it. I love the Mac. I actually love Mac basketball and Mac football. Skyy Moore, 5'10", 195, ran 4.41. People are going to have questions about the competition, but 95 catches in 12 games. Are people trying to talk themselves into Skyy Moore, Mike, or is Skyy Moore a legit round 1, round 2 prospect?
He's legit, and he's the other reason why I don't think Jahan Dotson goes round 1, because I think Skyy Moore can sneak into the back end of round 1 because, like you mentioned, speed. And unlike Jahan Dotson, who, you know, both shorter guys, 195 pounds at 5'10" is a load. I mean, he's built like a running back. So he has some size to him, gets off the line of scrimmage well, and then he led the FBS in broken tackles after the catch. He is a dynamic player with the ball in his hands, and he had the biggest hands of anyone in this draft class, 10.25-inch hands. Only, I think, 5 drops his entire collegiate career. So he is a guy who is very productive, very reliable. And yeah, you can knock him for the competition level, but he got open against Michigan in week 1 and got open against Pittsburgh in week 2 last year. 2 teams with guys who are going to have corners drafted in this upcoming draft. So I going back and watching those tapes, he looks like a first round player. The only thing is, you know, doesn't have the height, size, measurables of, you know, your ideal first round player from a smaller school. But I think teams are becoming more open to that with the proliferation of passing attacks, realizing that, you know, some of these talents could still end up at these smaller schools and be first round type of guys.
Before we get Mike out of here, we got to ask him about Christian Watson, because this is one of the most polarizing players in the draft. I mean, I think there's a lot to like here. You know, obviously his measurables. He's another guy that was a playmaker in the return game at North Dakota State. But, you know, I don't know. There's just a lot of varying opinions. What do you think about him, Mike?
I think he could become, to me, he reminds me a lot of Marquez Valdes-Scantling in that, you know, MVS has always had a bit of rare, like, physical ability. I think he ran like a 4.37. MVS did coming out, the 6'4", 205 or something, very similar size to Christian Watson, but kind of just rough around the edges and not a polished route runner, very like a 1-speed route runner. And that's what you see on Watson's tape. And he doesn't have to, you know, he doesn't have to vary his speed to run past an FCS corner. I think it's the biggest thing you see. But the all other thing, kind of the unspoken thing that doesn't get talked about with Watson enough, in my opinion, is he had legitimately tough drops, like 12.7% drop rate for his entire collegiate career, which that's not ingratiating yourself to any quarterback early on. And it's not just that. He was 30% in contested catches over the course of his career. So you're a 6'4", 205-pound wide receiver against FCS and you're not dominating at the catch point, I have serious concerns about that and how that's going to look at the NFL. And as much as he got open at the Senior Bowl, when guys were there at the catch point, he was not out physicaling anyone. So I do just think he's
that's literally the scouting report on Marquez Valdes-Scantling.
Yes.
I mean,
that's a great comparison. A one-trick deep
yeah.
I want to give you a chance to give the people a sleeper that you like. It can be a day 2 guy, it can be a day 3 guys, or anybody we haven't mentioned that you think the fantasy community needs to know about going into the draft.
Yeah, I think there's 2 guys I really like who probably end up on day 3. One is Danny Gray from SMU. He's a JUCO transfer who only just sort of coming into his own in terms of playing time at SMU this past year, but he ran low 4.3s at the combine. You see that show up on tape. To me, his game is a lot like I'm blanking on the bear, Darnell Mooney, in terms of you see his athleticism and everything he does. He is not just a straight line guy. He's kind of dynamic with that 4.3 speed. Drop issues, body catcher, whatever, but I think he could be a guy who, if the light switch turns on, is an actual impact player. And then the other one's Kyle Phillips, the slot receiver from UCLA. To me, if right situation goes to somewhere like a Hunter Renfrow did, where they're really going to feature him underneath, really going to let him work in that role, he gets open. He gets off the line of scrimmage and gets open. He has that shake. I think he went 6.7 3-cone and a 4-second shuttle. And he tested like a guy who you want to test for that slot that's going to get open there. So those are 2 guys to where, depending on where they go, and I especially highlight Phillips, if he lands in a position where they're going to feature the slot, I think could be very productive.
Okay. Before we let you get out of here, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about tight ends, specifically the MF'n Mackey Award winner, Trey McBride. And I know there's been, it seems like he's slipping. I mean, it seems like people are getting lower and lower on Trey McBride as the draft gets closer. He did win the MF'n Mackey Award. He was a sick basketball player here in high school in Colorado, was a great baseball player too. Sophomore in the Mountain West Conference, catches 45 balls, 506 yards. And this past year, 90 catches as a tight end for 1,121 yards, only 1 touchdown though. I think he can play inside or outside. Is this going to be a fantasy relevant player in Trey McBride? And what do you think about him?
Definitely. I think he's clearly the best all-around tight end in his draft class. I think his draft, he ends up going either back end of the second, early third. And to me, he's got speed and he's got ball skills and enough route running ability to where you could feature him on some other stuff. So that's a very good starting point for a tight end. A lot of the routes tight ends run nowadays are over routes, flat routes, seam routes. It just takes speed. So when you have that combo, I think he went 4.6 or maybe below 4.6, just under at his pro day, which you don't run a collegiate offense through a tight end the way Colorado State did. I think he had over 30% of their receiving yards last year, unless that guy's something special. So I think he is almost he's like Dallas. He's going to be like the Dallas Goedert in your for your NFL team, where it probably doesn't look like Travis Kelce, but you can still produce at a high level without looking like that.
Evan, any comments on the MF'n Mackey Award winner from this past year, Trey McBride?
Well, one of the reasons that we like motherfucking Mackey Award winners is because they have a pretty good track record of success in the NFL. Hunter Henry, Mark Andrews was arguably the best tight end in the NFL last year. TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts is definitely going to be a player. It bothers me a little bit about Trey McBride that he's not generating any first round buzz, at all. Why would that be? Because he checks a lot of boxes: production, athleticism, the fact that they ran the passing offense through him. Why is he not generating any first round buzz? Or is it that, draft Twitter and draft media are not on to that? It's over 0.5 tight ends to go in the first round is 4-1. And Trey McBride specifically is 4-1 to go in the first round. Are we missing something here?
That one's tough to make heads or tails of. Because I on the outside would say, just look at I think the NFL might be wising up on the track record of first round tight ends, that the juice isn't really worth the squeeze of guys like, OJ Howard over the years. So that could be part of it. The other thing is, Colorado State tight end is not like if you played at Ohio State or Alabama, we might be having a different conversation altogether. It's just who's going to stick their neck out there for a guy who played a low level of competition at a low value position. So I think those two factors are probably why you're not getting a lot of first round buzz, even if he's prospect wise, like I said, right up there with some of the guys who do deserve. I mean, like I said, Dallas Goedert didn't get first round buzz, and look at what he was, even though we loved him in that year's class, was still a second round guy.
Good point.
I think that there's so much data out there that tight ends are breaking out on their second contract. And so to use a first round pick and tie up like the most valuable thing in the NFL is these guys on first round rookie contracts, to tie it up in a tight end who may not even be ready to be good until his third or fourth year. I mean, I think it's no brainer not to take a tight end in round one, but yeah. Any other tight ends fantasy people should know about in this class, Mike?
I think Greg Dulcich could honestly outproduce McBride. I think as a pure route runner, he's better. He's a guy who's still kind of ascending. He came to UCLA at like 200 or so pounds, was a wide receiver there initially, and then grew into, 243 pound tight end, to where he's not an elite athlete by any means, but he's a kind of a plus all around athlete who I guess is probably more of a natural route runner, wide receiver, like get off the line of scrimmage, run a dig, shake at the top of the route, those sort of things that you need. So I think he could be a guy who 2 or 3 years down the line, if he puts on, 5 to 10 pounds more muscle, because he still is a little slightly built, is a guy that we're talking about, maybe like I don't want to put Mark Andrews on him, but who can break out as a receiver, even if he's not a true inline blocking type of guy.
Perfect. Okay. We've said it all on wide receivers and tight ends. Mike, tell the people where they can find you on social and where they can find all your work.
You can find me at PFF_Mike on Twitter. The final PFF draft guide comes out on Monday. You get it with any PFF subscription, and we are running promo codes right now for 50% off those subscriptions. I believe it's Elite 50. Someone's going to get mad at me if I butchered that, but go ahead and get one. You'll get 200 profiles on all these guys. Hopefully you enjoy.
Yep. I subscribe to PFF. I love all the work that they do there. Makes what we do certainly a lot easier by tracking every play in every game. We'll be back next episode with Thor to talk quarterbacks and running backs. For Mike, for Evan, for producer Luke, I'm Adam. Good luck, everybody.